Rock and roll.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you everybody so much for coming. Really excited to have you all here. We wanted to talk to you today about how to actually find use cases in the AI agentic world and figure out which ones are worth building. I think this is obviously a space with a lot of hype, but what we want to really help kind of clarify is show you a framework, show you how we think about this, and give you an idea of when it makes sense to build an AI use case, why you should build them, when it makes sense not to, and how we kind of go through all that. So my name is Filip Swat. I run advisory services at Ashling Partners. I like to think of that as helping our clients understand why what we do brings value, and that helps kind of helping set the strategy for projects, tying the build work we do, including both traditional automation and AI build, to corporate objectives and what really matters and helping calculate that value. I've got a relatively untraditional background. I was formerly an industrial engineer, so anything related to efficiency and processes is near and dear to my heart. I've also got a pretty long background in analytics. And I initially started my career as an anthropologist chasing monkeys through the jungle. So anything in the corporate world feels pretty easy after that. And with me, I've got Xavier Hanson, who needs no introduction, but we'll provide one anyway.
Thanks, Phil. How appropriate. I feel like I need to start at the beginning of my career. I used to be an osteopath, and I used to crack backs for a living. So Philip and I are both non-traditional in terms of our approach to how we've come about our careers. I've spent the last 12 years in RPA, originally in RPA, but intelligent automation, working across projects, across clients, both in Australia, as you can tell from the accent, but also for the last 8 years in North America. And as recently as 3 months ago, took over the head of delivery at Ashling, so that all the work and experience I've built up over the years we can share with the rest of the teams and with our clients. So happy to be here and happy to talk about this topic because it's very, very, I guess we're seeing a lot of clients struggle with where to start with Agentic. So hopefully this is very helpful for you. All right. So what are we going to talk about today? I think the first thing is it's always helpful, especially when we're talking about new technology, to cover the terms and language we're going to be using. So what is AI and understanding the ecosystem, because people throw the term AI at everything. So Philip's going to sort of talk us through some ground rules there and make sure that we're on the same level. We're going to talk through the framework that we're going to apply, or the initial framework we're applying to start to judge and rank our agentic opportunities. And we're going to go through a live scoring exercise. So for that one, we will actually ask for audience participation, which is always fun and scary for presenters. So be gentle. But we're going to go through some use cases of what we have seen in the past or have worked with directly, and take it through the framework, ask for your input so that we can kind of get you thinking about some processes or some opportunities within your organizations that might apply. And then take that to, okay, how do you turn that into a pipeline? How do you start to get a bank of those processes and opportunities together? And a real world example of that, and obviously a Q&A. Now, very quickly on housekeeping, please drop questions into the Q&A functionality on Zoom. We've got a lovely team here in the background helping Philip and I, carrying us through maybe. They'll be dropping questions to us so that if we can, we'll try to address them as we go, if the questions are kind of relevant to the topics we're talking about. Otherwise, we'll get them at the end. So when we get to the live Q&A as well, we'll pop everybody off mute. So feel free to come off mute there. Or if you don't want to talk, that's fine too. You can continue to drop questions in Q&A. So bit of housekeeping there before we get going. But yeah, I'll let Phil take over for the understanding the AI ecosystem.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Dave. And yeah, like Dave said, if you have any questions here or anywhere, just feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A section. I think what we want to start out here is I think you've probably even heard us at the beginning of this, probably using the terms like AI-based automation or agentic somewhat interchangeably. And I think that's a little bit of a tendency of these things are on a spectrum. But we wanted to kind of level set and give you an example of what exactly we mean when we use these terms, right? So we'll start off on the left with rules-based automation, which has been around for a long time. This is something that, started as scripts, then was kind of what RPA is, apps, and there's still a very big role for this. I think there's not a client that we see that doesn't use some form of scripting, RPA, rules-based automation. And there's absolutely still room for it. The difference between rules-based automation and AI-based automation and agents is really that it follows a predetermined set of paths. Which can be great because if you have a fixed set of inputs that follow an algorithm or a defined process with clear rules, then you get a fixed set of outputs. So basically, every time you run a rules-based automation, you have a very predictable output. The weakness, of course, is that if you have an input or something that doesn't match what's expected, it can break, which is why we get into AI-based automation and agents, which can tackle more flexible, thorny, call them human-like programs or problems. So the main difference between AI-based automate, what we're calling AI-based automation, or really AI and agents, is that agents can really act. So when we talk about AI, we generally mean generative AI, large language models, tools that can take in feedback or questions or some sort of inputs in an unstructured format or as a question or as a prompt or what have you, and then create some sort of output for that. So we see a lot of use cases around that, which we'll talk about kind of on the next slide. But really, the key difference between AI-based automation is that AI-based automation is usually just giving you an answer or a chatbot or something like that, whereas an agent kind of combines the arms and legs, if you will, of RPA and the ability to action with the reasoning or brain center of AI. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention kind of orchestration at the bottom, which was how we view this in one ecosystem. So I think what we always try to get across is that this isn't just point solutions. We try to see how these tools work together, and rules-based automate, which should be rules-based, AI-based where it should be.
And maybe I'll jump in there quickly, Philip, on
Yeah,
the
sure.
orchestration piece. I don't think it's often talked about, but with agentic solutions, orchestration is almost implicit in that very rarely are you going to have an agent do the process end to end for control reasons, for cost reasons. Typically, you'll have agents injected within a process, which means you need to orchestrate across them all and potentially have some traditional automation in there as well, to pick up files and move things around. So I think orchestration is implicit in everything we talk about when we talk about agentic.
Yep, great call out. So double clicking a little bit more into the AI space or kind of the brain system of any of these agents that we're talking about, we group these loosely into four categories. We have specialized, predictive, conversational, and agentic AI. So the two categories you see on the left are more ML or machine learning based. So specialized AI, a great example is something like a document understanding process or intelligent document processing. Taking in a document that may not be in a superstructured format. It could be an email, it could be an invoice that doesn't have necessarily a set format or something like that, extracting fields and summarizing them. We also have predictive AI, which has been around for probably half a century at this point in some way, shape, or form. And I think predictive AI is what used to be a lot of a big hype before LLMs came in, but there's still absolutely a big need for it. So predictive AI is any sort of predictive regression-based models that look at historical data, look at what's currently happening and predict an output. Again, both of these are a little bit more old school approaches compared to what we have on the large language model based, the LLM based conversational agentic AI, but they absolutely still have a role, and they're something we still see on a day to day. And then on the right side, we have the conversational agentic AI. Conversational AI, I think, needs very little introduction. I think you've all worked presumably with ChatGPT or Claude or something like that. Adding that to a chatbot is a pretty classic use case. And then agentic AI is kind of, in a sense, bringing it all together, but adding an element of actionability to all that. I don't know if you have anything else to add there, Zave.
No, but we'll pick up here though. I guess before there's kind of a couple of slight tangents we're going to go on in here just to add additional context because I think it's helpful when talking about AI. I think there's still an understanding element to this, but there is a when we're thinking about where to start with agents and with AI, it is useful to think about things that have hit the cutting room floor in the past with intelligent automation or things that we've partially automated or automated around because there's a very good chance that agents can help plug that gap. I was at an event earlier this week and I said, for the last 10 years, we've been sort of building around things where it got really sticky or, inserting a human being to maybe update an Excel file or something like that with a clunky handoff in SharePoint, etc. Now with agents, you can somehow go straight through that. You don't have to go around as much. So, if in the past it gets really, really hard to if there's 100 different business decisions that need to be made in a process, coding that out in traditional intelligent automation, really, really difficult, time consuming to build, it usually kills the value. Well, if you can explain to an agent through a prompt what you're trying to achieve, it can actually probably process and do some of that business decisioning. So you've got an option to tackle that problem that you never had before. There's a lot of different things here, but I think the a good use case that comes to mind for me is we were working in an insurance firm, and we were doing some sort of claims auditing and processing, and we had to effectively put all of the outputs into a spreadsheet for a human to review because there was a whole bunch of document extraction for explanations of benefits that had, different parameters for all the different patients out there. We ended up having built that into a spreadsheet and have a human eyeball that, and then they would upload that spreadsheet again back into a system. And very clunky, like I said, there is a very good use case there to insert an agent to extract the explanation of benefits information, put it all into the system, and then have a human review it. And I think just trying to think through cases like that where you either haven't touched it or you've built around it and it's potentially not providing as much value as a way to bring agents into the field in a safe way. Because typically those business units you've engaged at some point in your history, you've worked with them, you understand the requirements of the process, you understand how they work. And that's actually a pretty safe space to bring in new technology and do it in a controlled way. So I just want to make sure we highlight that as we talk through not only the framework for new opportunities but also to how to think about where tactically you might want to start with some existing ones.
And I think to Zave's point, right? We're not necessarily agents can do things that RPA couldn't, which means there's new opportunities. But I think exactly like looking at old opportunities or existing solutions that could work better, even though they already work, is absolutely, I think, an underutilized one. I think software testing is a big one where if you use an agentic approach, which can have self-healing. So if a button on a software test moves or something, an agent can respond to them in a way an RPA couldn't. It's a solved problem. We've been doing automated testing for decades, but we can do it better now and again. So yeah, don't just because it works doesn't mean it can't work better in some cases.
Excellent. There we go. So kind of continuing that theme of where agents can work. And again, this is all about trying to get the juices flowing and help you understand the kinds of things they can be doing. So perception, pretty, I guess, probably the first place a lot of people think is document ingestion, unstructured or semi-structured information, extracting that, contextualizing it, and putting it into a structured format. So typically you'll see this at the front of processes. So I actually, same event I was at earlier this week, I saw an ISG analyst, and he was speaking about another way to think about where agents are really useful is at the start and at the end of processes. At the start, taking complex information or omni-channel information in varied formats, consolidating that, structuring it so that it can go into a consistent process, or at the end, summarizing and pulling together a whole bunch of data to present or generate content for an output. So again, trying to get you thinking about things, but perception is really that upfront one. Reasoning is, hey, I've got these 5 inputs. Based on that, I'm going to choose this particular path. So you can give context to agents, and if you give them the information and that context, they can choose an action to take, which is the act piece. Based on that reasoning, they can then go and do. If you're talking to, I don't know, pick a chatbot online, one of the ones, say Gemini, you're talking to it and you ask it a question, it can say, here's what I recommend, but it doesn't actually do. It doesn't go and trigger that next thing for you. That's really where agents are next up. They have access to tools and to skills to go and actually do things. But we'll say, you want to make sure you have the right governance control around them, but they can actually do. And then learn, which is, I actually got a question the other day around, can LLMs and agents learn on their own? No. The models themselves are owned and run, they are large language models. So the OpenAIs of the world, the Anthropics of the world are the ones who train the models, and they train it on publicly available data. They've been trained on the internet. What you do is you can give context to the LLM and the agents so that it is from about your business. So really what we're talking about with learn isn't necessarily training the LLM. It's the agents themselves picking up when they have made mistakes and then using that as a feedback loop to the person who's building them to update the prompts, update the context, and make sure that they get better over time because they can effectively self-check and learn from that. So to give you a few kind of real examples of how you might use some of these capabilities, if we skip to auto processing, okay. Auto processing, there are sort of three elements you want to use here. As I said before, the upfront piece, uh, perception, ingestion of information. This existed in the past with things like IDP. IDP is good with structured and some semi-structured formats of inbound information. What you find is that LLMs and agents can really pick up that rest of the content. So more semi-structured stuff, unstructured stuff, bring that into something that's usable and provide that context. So in the case of order processing, orders come in, sometimes they're in free text email, sometimes they're in a spreadsheet. Who knows? They could come in very, very various. They could be handwritten forms for all we know. They come in, an agent can grab that, pick it up from an email inbox, ingest it, structure the data, and put it into a system or a place for the next agent to pick it up. We can have another agent then pick that up and look at it and say, well, based on this information, this customer, they have this history. I'm going to apply these SKUs and these products, and then push the order through. Now, if I can't find one of those products, then I can go and search the catalog of our products, either by SKU number or if it's close, name match it and offer that as an option as well. And then Act, you can route that order to fulfillment to confirm to make sure it makes sense and have that fired out the door.
And I think maybe just a quick note on that previous one, right? We're showing that not all of these solutions need all these components,
Yeah.
and not all these components have to be agentic, right? We're trying to showcase basically a couple examples just to give you ideas of patterns that work. But for example, in this example, the act step, we're describing an order processing example where there are specific, let's say, human actors that need to perform actions. You could simply have an RPA flow that says if it's customer A, B, and C, it goes to this person or something like that. So this is absolutely mix and match. The idea is just kind of to show the different patterns, different ways these things can work together.
Yeah. Um, and on that too, by the way, like I think I may have implied it as well, but these would typically be separate agents. Very rarely you're going to have one agent do all of these things, from a design perspective. So as you go from looking at your pipeline into design, very rarely do you want one agent to do them all. You kind of want to control each step and make sure that they're going to be better if they're more specific. You can give them access to fewer tools so you can control and govern them better. And you can have checks in between as well. So just when you're starting to think about how these actually look in reality, that's something to keep in mind.
Sounds like you might be saying that orchestration is an important part of this.
Right. I know this
Crazy
isn't an
how that works.
orchestration webinar, but it is implicit.
Every webinar is an orchestration webinar.
So another example, email triage. I think this is a fairly common one. Massive shared email inboxes with various customer and could be complaints, it could be questions, it could be a photo of their dog. Who knows? That actually did happen to me once. We were doing a process at a client where they were supposed to send in updated photos for security badges, and the amount of times it was a photo of dog or a Santa or something like that was pretty incredible. And boy, could we have used agents 8 years ago for that. Anyway, so perception again, looking at those emails, similar story, structuring unstructured data. That they're going to be free text. They're going to have all sorts of information in there that could be in anywhere. So it's trying to extract that, gain context. Also, read intent. You can start to read intent with agents, so they can pick whether it's a complaint email potentially, or just a question, or something really really urgent. Once that's in, you have an agent that goes and looks that is the urgency. Once that kind of urgency is determined, the intent's determined, the content is determined, you can place it in prioritization. So the act would be this goes to X team, or this goes in this part of the queue because it's really, really urgent, or this is the fifth time somebody's emailed and they still haven't got a satisfactory answer. Escalate to an L2, L3 team, those sorts of actions that it can take. And then the learn piece, which is a little bit more tricky, but you can see, hey, we've got 50 password resets coming through at the moment. I think there might be something wrong with the system. Let's ping that. That's a learning. Let's ping that the customer service team that they're probably going to get a whole lot more inbound calls and be very proactive about it. So not only learning, about themselves, but also seeing and spotting patterns in some of the data they're ingesting and responding appropriately to that.
Just a quick response to one of the questions from Andrew that we saw in the chat. How do we determine an agent is necessary and adds enough value over just building with RPA and IDP? We will be getting into that framework very shortly. Long story short, we have a five-part framework that identifies how agent ready a process is and whether it's a good fit. So we should be answering that very shortly.
Yeah.
Sorry, to jump in there, Zay, but it seemed
That's
like
good. No, I mean, the
a
answer is
good
good.
preview,
You kind
right?
of come at it from the negative, right? It's like,
Yeah,
how far can you go with the IDP and the RPA and the cost, and then you start to have those discussions.
sure.
This one's a little bit more, I guess, future. I don't think there'd be many organizations that would be in a position to drop this into production tomorrow, but it is a good indication of where we're headed, which is pattern recognition and ability to respond quicker and float information to important people in an urgent situation. So, in a hospital, you can get. I mean, these days everything's electronic, so you can monitor vitals pretty well centrally. Nurses stations now have in a lot of hospitals have patient vitals at the nurse's desk, so they can monitor without going into the rooms. You have an agent sitting over that, observing that, monitoring it, and then using the reasoning step, um, combine that information. So an elevated heart rate might be someone got up to go to the bathroom. An elevated heart rate, high blood pressure, and an increase in temperature might mean that is a pattern of this person is in distress. And then we can go and trigger an alert through ACT to prioritize that patient for review and make sure that the nurse goes and spends time with that. And then over time, the agent can actually see that the patterns it's using, or you can build in a function so that the patterns it's using around combining all of those vitals to make a decision and to prioritize. You can use that to update the prompt, update the context to make sure that it is more accurate over time as well. So very, I guess, like I said, a little bit more future facing, a very cool use case, I think, and something that, again, if you're not there today, start to think about how you might be able to get there with some of these, redesigning your processes around agents, I think is probably the point of this one. All right, let's talk about the actual framework. So, I think it was Andrew, right? He led us in nicely here. We're going to start
Exactly.
talking about
Checks in the mail. That's the
exactly. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah. So there's sort of three broad categories, which is this going to be valuable? Just flat out. I don't think that's necessarily just an agentic, actually, approach to opportunity measuring. With anyone who's been doing intelligent automation for a long time, we always focus on value first. So is it going to produce business value? And I actually will talk about value very briefly. I know this whole webinar is not about value, but I'll talk about the types of value briefly. But in the past, we've talked about hard savings versus soft savings, etc. But is there value back to the business? Is there an economic or soft benefit to performing this before we even get started? Does it make sense? And then should you automate it? Does it have repeatability? Does it have the volume and the frequency that justifies going in and automating it, as opposed to if it's a once off or once every 6 months, someone has to spend a day doing a report? It's probably not worth it. But if it's 50 times a day, 100 times a day, then it's definitely worth talking about. So as a sense check and a sanity check. And then do we have access to the data? Is it easy to find? If it's spread all over the place in 50 different databases that are managed in access by people all over, in various business units, there might be a step before that, which is re-engineering the process to get that data in one place to make it automatable, because trying to automate that is going to, you're building on a foundation that is quite rocky. And I guess the newer questions, they both existed, those top two questions for intelligent automation. The newer process, the question is, should you automate this process with an AI agent? So it's not should you automate it, it's like where do you put that in? Inputs unstructured or semi-structured? Definitely one of the questions, as we've talked about with Perceive. Are there many outputs? So do you need to have different content for different folks as you come out? Another really, really good one. The is decision making required is a little bit more nuanced, but is if there are 3 decisions to be made, maybe you don't need an agent. If there's 50 and it requires 10 different inputs in terms of how to make those 50 different decisions, then yeah, maybe it is something that we need to talk about an agent about. Now, I'll talk about value on this next slide here before we get into the framework, and Philip can take you through the framework. But I did want to talk about value just a little bit because you've effectively got your hard and soft. And we need to talk about it because it's going to come up when we talk about the live exercise. Hard benefits is stuff that we've been doing for many, many, many years. So if you hit, I think this should animate, there's a whole table here. But the hard benefits are, cost out savings, cost avoidance, anything that touches revenue. So if you can improve turnaround times or speed to market or anything like that, then you're going to get a hard saving on that. Um, Cost of CTO, so total cost of ownership, TCO, sorry, total cost of ownership, any reduction in that, very easy to track. Reduction in risk budget as well, which I've not seen often, but I have seen in my history. So they're easier to quantify hard benefits. So when we're talking about value, they are definitely the ones that are easier for CFOs and finance people to understand and draw a line on a budget and get approval for a business case. However, depending on your corporate goals, there are also other levers, operational, experiential. So do you have regulatory requirements, auditing that you need to make sure that you're on top of? That you can track that value and is definitely worth considering that as you're going through your agentic kind of prioritization. And then experiential is like customer service, customer turnaround times, CSATs. If you've got the ability to do NPS scores, all those sort of things, those are, again, if they're corporate objectives that you can tie yourself to, then that is part of the value conversation beyond just the hard benefits as well.
And maybe just two things before we go to the next one. So I think one of the things that we always try to pay attention to with something like this is with agents, and I think the sepsis use case that Zabe talked about, right? The idea of using agents to flag hospital patients who are at risk of becoming septic and elevating them is a great example of why a framework like this matters. If you measure the value of that in cost savings, right? You're saying, okay, maybe nurses spend an hour a day less or something. You're really missing the big picture, right? Which is that you're saving lives, right? So there's all these great use cases that, yes, most programs realistically that we see need a cost takeout component. But if you completely ignore or don't even make an effort to quantify this experiential value or at least elevate it, then I think you're going to make less of a case and you're going to be able to tell not as good of a story here. So I think that's kind of the critical part here. And then I think as we move through the framework, somebody told me a long time ago that the most important part of a strategy is what you say no to. And I think to summarize, that's kind of how I think about this framework. Do we say no to something because of value? Do we say no because it's not a good automation? Do we say no because it's not an agent? So we want to make sure that what we build with agents isn't just we're throwing an AI at the problem. It's because there's a good fit for it. So I think we can go to the next one. Yeah, perfect. So the way we approach this framework, right? This is two parts, right? So this is the should you automate? Is this even worth us looking at? Let's assume it's got value. Is a human the best approach to this, or should it be some sort of automated solution? And we really look at two main criteria, right? Process volume and frequency, and data availability and process readiness. So process volume and frequency is the good old-fashioned process metric. Is this a high transaction volume? Is this something that currently takes up a lot of somebody's time? Generally speaking, you wouldn't want to automate something that runs, once a quarter or once a month or something like that. You're looking for higher volume processes. And of course, there is a trade-off. If it's a lower volume process that takes a lot of time, let's say loan origination is a process where evaluating a single loan can take 90 minutes or something like that, or parts of investigation in the insurance industry can be very time consuming. So really, but the math on the first one is straightforward. It's how often does this happen times how long does it take? There's kind of at least the time you could save, and that's usually at least a baseline number. Um, One note kind of on that, which is in the note above too, is that if something doesn't meet those high transaction volumes or you're really not sure, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad candidate for automation. It means it's not a great candidate right now. So I think process reimagination is another topic we could spend a lot of time talking about, but that's how do you take a process, modify it, and get it ready to be automated? But I mean, the adage goes, don't automate a broken process, and I think that's very true. Um, the second point there too is just about data availability, process readiness. Your agents, and I think Zay was talking about the accuracy of prompts and kind of that learning process. you're only going to be as good as the data you have. And a lot of times, if you have partial data or it's something incomplete, you risk having a worse result than if you didn't automate something. So we really want to make sure that if we're answering, if we're trying to do an underwriting process where we measure multiple sources of risk or something like that, we want to make sure we have all the inputs that are needed for an answer. In some of these areas of data can be flexible, and we'll talk about how agents can work with poorly structured data. But we need to be sure that we have some sort of way of getting to the data. We have a problem to solve.
I think, sorry, just very quickly, I want to highlight Aaron's comment there too, which is the high volume high process volume. The low volume, high handle time stuff is for agents, that is very much worth highlighting. Typically means that there's a lot of the document consolidation, document gathering, or reasoning, or checks, or reach outs, or outreach, all of those sorts of things that hold things up. Multiple system touches potentially as well. So, you know, all of this is a framework to help you judge. It doesn't necessarily exclude things outright. So if you have high handle times and low volumes, then it's definitely worth a look as well. Just want to highlight that. So thanks, Aaron. And Drew, one very quick one on the swivel chair. I didn't get to that, but effectively a swivel chair is when you've got systems don't connect. So you've got a person doing the data transfer, and that means that you've likely got an error or introduction of errors into that as well. So you want to try to remove that. So the idea is that the value is your error reduction because you're not doing swivel chair work. So a couple of questions there, Philip, before you go on. Sorry, mate.
Yeah, perfect. All right. So I think, Andrew, going back to your earlier question on how do we evaluate whether an agent's the right fit? So first we say, is there value in this process? Is there either quantitative or experiential value that we can capture? The second one is, do we want to capture that value through an automation? Do we have the volume to justify an automation? Do we have the data readiness? And then finally, we get to, should you automate this with an AI agent? And so we have 5 criteria, and we're very excited. Prep yourselves because we're going to be doing a live exercise where we do a couple scoring of examples using this framework specifically. But we rate this based on logic, outcomes, humans in the loop, adaptability, and integration complexity, which I think we've touched on already. But I'll talk through each of these criteria, and then we can give you a few examples here. So logic is the variability of the process. Essentially, is this something that always flows from point A to point B to point C, like invoice processing, or is this something more like an investigation where the process variance or the different ways a process can flow can vary drastically? Outcomes is how many acceptable answers there are. Is the output binary? If you need, a yes/no answer, not necessarily something that needs to be serviced by an agent then, but if you need an answer to be a response, particularly kind of a nuanced response, agents are a great fit. Humans in the loop, I think can depend on the level of human interaction, but generally, if we have processes that require human supervision, adding an agent can be very helpful because it can help interpret what humans are providing to it in a way that doesn't rely as much on predefined structured inputs as an RPA flow. Adaptability then is how variable are the actual process inputs. So that can be unstructured data. Processing emails is a classic document understanding use case. I think the example here we have is in software testing because we have a semi-structured set of fields that can shift positions. And an agent can be smart enough to know that if a submit button shifts from the top right to the bottom right, it's still a submit button, which an RPA may not be. So that knowledge of how the process inputs might change or whether you're going to be working with unstructured data is critical. And as you can see, that's one of the highest weights on there too. And then we have integration complexity, which I think Zave's alluded to. If we've got to make connections to multiple different databases, harmonize that data and understand it, kind of provide multiple sources of context. That's feasible with both RPA or rules-based automation and AI or agents. But agents are going to be the ones that can actually take advantage of context. With an agent, the upside to the integrations is that more integrations means more context, means more answers and better answers rather than just more work. So the way we use this framework essentially, and we'll see it in a second, is we go through every single one of these criteria, and then we score it based on 1 to 100. We usually use multiples of 10 just to keep things simple. We multiply it by the weight, and we get an answer at the bottom. All right. So I think we can try to be as interactive as possible. I think I jumped the gun on explaining it, but we'll show you three examples, and we'd love to see kind of a vote or some interaction here. I believe that if you raise your yes, go for it,
Yeah,
Xavier.
you got to raise your hand.
I was
Yep.
gonna raise hand. Yes, perfect. Do you want to say it?
No, you got it,
Perfect. Okay.
mate.
Um, so I believe we're not able to unmute everyone right away, but if anybody wants to raise their hand, we can unmute you. Otherwise, feel free to type in the chat or whatever is comfortable, and we'll try to keep the dialogue going. So I'll walk us through the first example, and I can pause, give you guys some time to think, respond, get us our thoughts. So the example we're looking at, is an order entry process. And we've seen this in a number of clients. The example we're kind of choosing is a parts manufacturer that has a large base of industrial clients. So B2B clients, they receive orders through a pre-populated form through a client portal. And every order has to be checked. We need to make sure that the product actually exists, that the product's in stock to be filled, the customer is the right match. There may be a price list lookup or something like that. And then, of course, if that product is there, great, send it on to the ERP, get ready to ship the product. Otherwise, if something's wrong, we hand that order off to the customer care team to say, kind of fix this. So we've pre-filled the should this be automated section a little bit. We're saying it's a high volume process. This is a large client, many customers, and then we're saying the data availability is accessible. We've got structured data coming in via EDI. We do have good accessibility to go through it. So does anybody want to take a shot at walking through this? We've got our first, we can kind of go, I think, criterion by criterion. So if we're talking about logic, let's say, how many ways can this process go? Does anybody have some thoughts on what a good number would be? High, low, medium, particular scores? Feel free to raise your hand if you have any other thoughts. Hey, Zave. Oh, perfect. Aaron, thank you for volunteering and bravely being the first one.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Excellent. Okay, I mean, I think it's pretty strong logic score, right? If the logic is well defined, things like does this meet minimum order? In my experience, you can define that logic pretty well.
Yeah, so I guess in the sense of logic too, right? We call the term logic, but it's really how many variants of the process are there? Is the logic very well defined? So I think you're completely right, right? So it would be well-formulated logic, kind of a singular flow, which I would actually say in this case corresponds to a low score because we've got very well-defined logic, not a lot of different process variants, right? Xavier, you good with that?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
Corey is too.
Oh, Corey says low as well. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to put in
We have
a
consensus.
20 or 30. Let's say split the difference, 20, 25. Any objections there? Let me see if I can populate this in here.
I got you. I
Oh,
think
perfect. Okay.
we're
Fantastic.
using the live document. Maybe we're not.
I believe so. It's a 25. We'll try to, I'm tracking it. I think you're tracking it as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So then we can move on to outcomes. So how many potential outcomes do you see here? Is this something that has, just a valid yes, no, thumbs up, thumbs down, or is this something different? Um, Aaron, do you want to go two for two? Low would be
So
not a good fit. Yes.
I see. So there's not that many outcomes, right? It's either the order is kind of approved or it gets escalated.
Something like that. Yeah, essentially. I mean, you could look at it approved, disproved. It could be disproved for a number of reasons, but yeah, I would agree. I would say there are not very many valid outcomes to the process. So I would think low, which I think is kind of what we're seeing here, right? Out of stock and error, or in stock, out of stock, valid, invalid, with maybe some nuance there. But I would also give that another pretty low one. I'm comfortable calling that a 20 or something like that. I don't know about you, Zave.
There's twos in the chat, and I'm going to say that's a 20.
That's a 20. Fantastic. Perfect. All right. We're doing great and appreciate everyone for participating either verbally or over the chat. So then humans in the loop. Do we think there's a large human in the loop component here? And that would mean basically how often does a human need to intervene in this process? And I think maybe Aaron, are you raising your hand because your hand remained raised, or would you like to go for three for three? We're happy with anything.
He's dropped his hand.
Fantastic. Okay.
Not large.
No, no. That's very astute of actually. We don't have data about the flagged orders, so I think that's the right type of question to ask. I think in only human in the loop would be exceptions like customer doesn't exist. Yeah, exactly. I think I would also mark that as a pretty low one. We can say a 10 or 20. I mean, with 20, we've been going with the 20s. We can happy to stick with that one.
Mhm.
I think Drew, usually 50 would be on the higher end. I would call it a medium level. I think if we're leaning kind of between low and medium, I'm happy to call it a 30 or a 40 or something like that. Um, I think for unknowns is fair. If we have an unknown process, that's
Yeah.
yeah. So we could yeah. Let's call it 40 or something like that. I think that's a all right. And then adaptability. So what we say when we say adaptability, this is basically how much does the process need to adapt to unstructured or variable input. So how many variations will we have in the structure of the input? I think this one is kind of the clearest one to answer. I don't know if anyone has it in the chat, but to me the adaptability needed here is extremely low. We have a very standard set of inputs. This is coming through EDI, has pre-populated fields on everything. So very, very low score. We could call it even a 10 or something like that. So I think we've got a 25, 20, 40, 10, and then integration complexity, basically for how many different source systems we need to plug into. Um, in this example, we're kind of giving it to it's connected to an EDI and a customer portal. There are examples where it could be connected to multiple customer portals. I don't know if anyone has any strong feelings on this one. This is another one I would mark relatively low for integration complexity, just because we're kind of giving two examples that's linked in. It could be broader, but I would call this a 20 or a 30. I don't know how you feel about that, Zave.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, perfect.
20.
All right. Well, if we could go back just for a second, so then we can do the scoring methodology in action. It was kicked out of the original presentation. Does anyone have, or Zay, do you happen to have a
Yeah, I've got the
calculator?
weighted. So it's 21.75 total.
21.75. Okay, fantastic. And the way we're doing that, right, is the weighting. I think we might have had on our previous slide, but we're taking each score, multiplying it by its weight, and then summing them together, right? So for logic, it would be 25 times 25%. That gives us a score. We add that to the outcomes, which is 20 times 20%. And we get a score of what was it, Dave? 21.75?
Yeah, percent.
Okay, out of 100, which I would say is a very low score. So, what does everybody be think there? Like, what should we agentify this? Should we not do anything about it? Any thoughts on? We've got really high qualification scores, really low agent score. What would you suggest? Yeah, perfect. Aaron, you are star student right now. I would completely agree. It's almost like we crafted this
Andrew.
example to show that, but I think we wanted to start this off with an example of why agentic isn't always the way to automate.
Yeah. I think too, it's worth mentioning that these answers are relative. Like in isolation, one process, putting it through the framework isn't going to give you a great deal, high, medium, low, whatever. What it helps with is if you have four or five, then you have a relativity. You know that this one is probably going to be more appropriate. And if you automate one of those with an agent and it is successful or not, then it helps anchor that, in your whole pipeline. It helps you understand which ones are going to be more agent ready and which ones aren't as well. So, 21.7, there's no like threshold of, hey, we think 30% is when you should use an agent. It's really about building out your pipeline, understanding relativity, and having a standard way of approach to scoring so you can make that judgment ongoing. Yeah, potentially, Mark. Yep.
And Zave, I think we've got about 15 minutes
I'll
left
just
if
do
we
this
can do some
one.
Q&A, so I think we can probably just jump through these pretty quick.
Yeah, maybe we just do this one. Maybe skip the last one because the last one's more of an illustration on
Yep.
the qualification at the top. So, whatever. Okay, let me talk to you about this one. So, mortgage processing doesn't third-party mortgage processing doesn't exist in Australia. So I had a lot of fun learning about that when I first came over here. Effectively, there's a process when it comes to bids for foreclosures, and I'm oversimplifying this by a long way. But for this process, the bids that go or the minimum bid that goes into a sale that has to be communicated to the lawyers that are handling the sale for a foreclosure, the minimum bid is a calculation performed based on various factors like how many liens are on the property, um, the value of the property, and crucially, the location. And based on the location, there are state and even county in some case regulations on how you do that calculation. So there's 50 plus different ways to do this calculation for what the minimum bid is. Um, the process itself isn't huge in terms of FTE. There's a couple of people doing it, but it is highly stressful, and so the turnover of those people is quite high. It's not a great employee experience, and that is because the amount of risk involved. A carried zero or a decimal point in the wrong place, or pulling the wrong state information can mean a pretty devastating loss to the organization because you're out of pocket $1 million instead of 100,000, that sort of thing. So you got to be very, very careful. Human factors, bingo. Um, so in this process where the output is very important in terms of what it is. There is really only one. But and the input is the kind of information that's coming from source systems. So value of property, location of property, other liens on the house, et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of the amount of logic involved, the amount of paths and branches this process can take, and which, by the way, we did try to automate this with RPA, so I think it's a really good use case. So, what does everybody think for the logic, the amount of logic involved in a process like this, were we to automate it? Drew's gone all the way to 11. Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess anyone want to take a swing as to why the logic is complex, how many paths it can take? It's the amount of outcomes sorry, not the amount of outcomes, but effectively the matrix of all of those states and counties. You can the parts of the calculation or the core calculations quite easy, but the nuance of having all of those different ones is very high. So let's go with 100 there. I'm happy with that one. With Drew, too many variables, exactly. Outcomes. This is actually a bit of an interesting one. So in terms of outcome, what variability do we see in that? What allowed variability would we see in that? Keep in mind this is a high risk, or the risk profile in this process is quite high. No one want to answer? I'll go with low with that one. So I'm going to put in a 10 or a 20. Effectively, you can't really get any other answer. If you do, then you're in trouble. So there is kind of one output. Granted, the calculation is complex and what goes into it is complex. But really, we're only having one output, and it has to be pretty much bang on every single time. So for this one, interestingly, the score is low for outcomes. Do we want the bid accepted? It doesn't matter if it's accepted or not. It's a minimum bid. So it's a threshold that has to be met before the auction is allowed to effectively actually, otherwise it goes back in where they hand it in at the auction if it doesn't meet its minimum threshold. This is us setting the minimum bid for a foreclosure. So
it's essentially more of a regulatory / QA
bingo.
process.
Exactly.
A bidding one, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Humans in the loop. Anyone want to have a guess at this one? So this is, do we require a person in the process? 100? Yeah, it's pretty high. Yeah. Because of the risk, right? Like bingo, there we go, Aaron too. We want people to have a look at this. I think what this does is floats information. It takes if we build this the right way, it'll take some of the pressure off the people in terms of having to find that information, be accurate every time, and turns it into a review process. So hopefully helps with that churn. But I think you're right. We want somebody looking at this before it goes out the door, given the amount of risk. Bingo. Yeah, everyone's on top of that one. So I think we go high with that. I'm happy with 100. It probably makes the calculation look even better. So let's do that. Adaptability. So change. Actually, that's something I didn't mention, and now is probably going to very much lead this answer. But the regulatory, like the states and counties, change their rules more than once a year. So and they are sourced from publicly available sources. So we're talking websites, county and state websites, and all that sort of stuff. They're not in one place. So kind of answer that one for you. But the adaptability is very high too, because as those rules change, we arguably, if we were to code this regularly with RPA, you have to then go and update all your business rules. Whereas if you've got the context for the agent, then again, yeah, 100, Thanks, Drew. We'll go with 100 there too. And then lastly, integration complexity. This one's an interesting one. The inputs, the source system inputs for some of the core come from one core mortgage management system, so mostly structured, but then the states and county regulations come from websites. So anyone want to take a stab at integration complexity? Yeah, about 80. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. Somewhere in the middle. It's not too hard, but again, it's the access to the publicly available sources. If you're trying to build an object or a workflow for every website, then it's going to take a while. So we've got a 90, 10, 100, 180, which on my little tracking sheet on the side here with the weights. I wish I could do the mental arithmetic to know what that was off the top of my head, but it's running at about 76.5, so quite high. I think it's pretty obvious why to everybody why it's a good agentic solution. It's that really the second step, if we were talking about the four before, which is the reasoning piece, that's the hard bit. It's taking in the various factors when it comes to state and county, making that decision and handing it off. And again, one of those ones that we automated, which attempted to automate with traditional intelligent automation back in the day, and I really wish we had agents because the outcome would have been much better in the end as well.
Yeah, I think I'm running into it as like a 79 or something like that.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
quite a high score too, and we see outcomes being the only reason that's not even higher. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I think we'll skip this one for time. Yeah.
Just to give a previous example, the example we had before was a really good reimagination example. It was an HR onboarding process that was low volume, spreadsheet based, kind of a prime example of when you may want to look at fixing the process or increasing its volume before you start looking at agentifying. There's basically enough groundwork to be done that you don't want to start automating it because there's still too many brittle, fragile components in it.
All right. So I guess we've talked a little bit about, and thank you all for participating in the live exercise. Like I said, as hosts, it's always scary for us when when we're relying on other people to reach out and talk to us. So appreciate your input. We've talked about, what AI is. We've talked about how to look at an individual process and the things you need to think of when you're trying to assess for suitability. Then it's like, okay, how do you then build that into a pipeline of opportunity? And that is where a lot of the framework value kicks in, is because you've got a whole batch to compare each other to and to prioritize. So as you're going down the journey of building that pipeline, the first thing you need to do is actually figure out where you are, where you're at. Have you done barely any intelligent automation at all? And you're just getting started even on raw automation, let alone agentic. Okay, then there's some capability that needs to be sped to be built there, and probably go some baby steps early on. Don't try to automate your everything end to end day one. If you're growing, if you already have an existing automation program and you're starting to do agentic, then advice from before around what's old is new again is a really good place to think about picking up some of the processes that have hit the cutting room floor or enhancing existing ones, and expanding. If you already have agents in automation and you've got your automation program in place, agents in production, and you've got your program in place, how to ramp that up and go to the next level, that's when you start to really think about things like the sepsis one we were talking about, which is redesigning and reimagining what you can do with that capability. As you go through, though, you do need to define your guardrails and your approach to growth. I think I've alluded to it many times throughout this, but you can't start at the end. You have to understand, you have to build capability, you have to build understanding within your organizations too. You might understand AI, they might not just yet. So trying to give examples to the businesses you're working with small automations and agentic to show them what's possible, build the guideline and use that to define your growth approach, and build the guardrails around where you will and where you won't use agents. Security and governance is so important as part of that. And as you go through curating your pipeline, I've touched on this a fair bit, but use the framework to play them off against each other and prioritize. As you get into a rhythm around that, trying to figure out how to scale the actual approach to finding opportunities. So things like discovery diagnostic, or using tools to go and find, large swaths of processes to put through the framework and really build that pipeline as quickly as possible. So yeah.
And if you're not familiar with what a discovery diagnostic is, I think we can talk about it at some later date. Would love to hear from you, and I think we can also we could go to the next slide now if you guys want to. But I think what hopefully you've enjoyed the time we've had so far. I know I have, and appreciate everyone for the participation. But if you would like to do this in a more hands-on workshop, if you want to kind of look at your own use cases and see how the framework applies there, or have a discussion where we could go, we would absolutely love to hear from you. This is something we do day in, day out. But I mean, we're passionate about it. We like to do it. So if you've seen or if you think there's value in what we've talked about today, reach out to us, answer the poll. We can get in touch with you and schedule something. And I think maybe just as a final plug of how we approach this, kind of because they've obviously talked through how we make this real. We have a couple kind of foot in the door offerings that we do. So we offer a website, a workshop where we can talk through and kind of start to prioritize some of these examples. We do a discovery diagnostic, which is kind of a operational scan to see what opportunities exist in the organization, where there's value, and where we would want to focus automation or agents. And then we have a number of options around reimagination. Um, so if you do want to use the poll, this is obviously a free workshop. It would take, a few hours of your time. More than happy to talk to you guys, or if you have any questions about it, please use the poll. We spent a lot of time building the poll. We would love to hear from you guys or reach out to us directly. And I think with the 2 minutes that we have left, also more than happy to open it up to questions. I think really appreciate the participation through the chat. But Andrew, yes, love to hear from you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we go.
Yeah. Yes.
So going back to that sales order use case, I happen to be working on a sales order use case with one of my clients, and we came to the same conclusion that we shouldn't use agents for it. But this is kind of an orchestration question because we're also planning to automate the material master create and the customer master create process. So in a scenario like that, I had the thought we could use an agent to be checking does the customer exist and mark that as an exception. And instead of passing that off to human in the loop, we pass it off to another automated process that goes and creates that customer and then passes it back to finish creating the order. So my question is essentially about, how do we factor those types of nuances of like end-to-end processes or larger scale multi-automations that interact with each other? How do we factor that into this decision about if an agent should be included?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. The general approach is kind of what we do in the discovery diagnostic is we list out kind of every process and sub-process that's within the domain. And then we look at what are the intersection points there, and then what are the teams, right? So I think the intersection point there is that a customer care team is jumping in and handling, let's say, those exceptions or failing to handle them or passing them off to somebody else, and we could install an agent there, right? So I think we would capture the exceptions, realize that's a separate process, and then kind of apply that same framework on the exception process itself, which I think somebody else had suggested before. But yeah, really good question.
Yeah,
But also is
that is that operational diagnostic level. When you go that next level up, Andrew, you try to define the horizontals, the services you're delivering, and all the processes that touch it, and then you examine each one of those processes and that kind of end-to-end view. That's a little bit of reimagining there as well, by the sounds of things. So really good question because that's where this stuff's headed, and it's what it enables us to do. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you all for staying a little bit longer. Thank you for filling out the poll. Reach out. We love to talk to you about these things. We're seeing a lot in the market, what people are doing well, what people aren't doing so well. So happy to share our stories there. But yeah, reach out to us and love to talk to you and appreciate your time today. Thanks, everybody.